Honkai Star Rail just released, and you probably have a million questions, like how do I build my characters, and when will I finally get a good relic? But today, I'm here to answer a question that nobody asked in the first place. What are the best light cones for every path? I'm going to tell you exactly what you should be aiming for as a free-to-play and as a paid player. As a heads up, I'm not going to go over the Battle Pass light cones because they're just not obtainable for free-to-play under any circumstances, but you technically can get the 5-star light cones if you're lucky, even as a free-to-play. Every Battle Pass light cone is pretty damn good, and I may go over them in a separate video just so you know which ones are the best for you, but for now I have $0 in my bank account and can't test them. And if you enjoy, then subscribe. There's a ton of light cones, but just know that there are limited 5-star cones, so I'll probably end up making an updated version of this later in the game's lifespan. For the Harmony, you have Bronya, Asta, and Tingyun. And though they don't deal a ton of personal damage, you definitely took emotional damage when you didn't pull Bronya. For these 3 units, the best free-to-play light cone is going to be Past and Future, which is a craftable 4-star. Past and Future is actually a pretty insane light cone for being a free-to-play craftable one. It gives the next acting character a 16% damage bonus at S1. This can be extremely helpful when you know how to build your teams and their speed stats, and since it's free-to-play, you can superimpose it to level 5, which ends up being a 32% damage bonus for the next in line character. This effect only lasts for 1 turn, but for characters like Seele who get multiple actions per turn, it's even better. And on top of that, on Bronya, you can choose who gets the buff just by using her skill on them. It's a ton of value, and I'd highly recommend using it if you don't have access to the next light cone called Dance Dance Dance. This light cone moves your character's action forward by 16% after ulting, which works differently from how increasing your speed stat does. If increasing your speed stat improves how quickly you get to the front of the line, action forward lets you just cut the line. This lets you get more actions per combat cycle. It's kind of a broken light cone, and though it is gacha, sometimes it can even be better than the next light cone, which is a 5-star gacha light cone called But the Battle Isn't Over, where it increases your energy regen rate by 10% and regenerates a skill point whenever an ultimate is used on an ally, up to once per 2 ults. The regen rate seems low, but when stacked with the right relic, it can help you get your ultimate much faster. When the wearer uses their skill, the next ally taking action deals 30% more damage, which basically takes the good part about Past and Future and combines it with skill point generation. But the Battle Isn't Over is broken on Harmony characters, but Dance 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 is an amazing light cone, and sometimes even better. And Past and Future is amazing for free-to-play players who save up to craft it, and hopefully later superimpose it. Next up, let's look at the Hunt light cones. Hunt. As of release, these are going to be characters that are squishy and deal high damage, most of which want crit stats. For free-to-play players, you actually have the option to get the 5-star light cone Chase. Actually, this is called Cruising in the Stellar Sea, but I have brain rot, so. Which increases your crit rate by 8 to 16% depending on enemy HP. And when you defeat an enemy, your attack increases for 2 turns. This light cone is actually insanely good value for free-to-play players, and I highly recommend picking this one up from Herta's shop if you can, and superimposing it later. Alternatively though, if you haven't done that yet, but you have got lucky on the gacha, you can use subscribe for more, which is also what you should do if you're enjoying the video. It gives the wearer a 24% damage buff to skill and basic attacks, which is already pretty massive, but if you're on full energy, it doubles that amount. Most of the time, you're not going to want to sit on full energy, but there are some instances where you'll want to save your ult to quickly burst something down. Damage bonus is worth more than attack percent in many cases, and this light cone is insane value from the gacha. Speaking of damage bonus though, swordplay is also pretty good. For each time the wearer hits the same target, damage dealt increases by 8%, stacking up to 5 times. The important thing to note about this is that in single target against bosses, you are basically going to always have that damage bonus, assuming you don't switch targets to ads or anything like that. That can total up to a 40% damage bonus, and that can be a lot of damage. And she's best girl! Lastly, the best hunt light cone in the game right now is Seele's In the Night light cone. This light cone increases your crit rate by so much that it should be a main stat. It also gives basic and skill damage and ult crit damage based on your speed. With it also having higher base stats that scale better with your relics, In the Night is an insanely strong hunt weapon for all current hunt characters. If you don't have any of these, then you can craft River Flows in Spring, which is actually a pretty solid light cone and can hold you over for most of the game. Next up is the Destruction light cones. Destruction characters are bruisers, but don't worry, they won't bruise your bank account. For your best free-to-play option, you can farm up and buy On the Fall of an Aeon from Herta's shop. This is a 5-star light cone that increases your attack every time you attack an enemy up to 4 times per battle. When you break an enemy weakness, you gain a damage bonus for 2 turns. It's a pretty solid stat stick overall. As for the best 4-star light cone for most Destruction characters, a Secret Vow is amazing for its ability to increase your damage dealt by 20% unconditionally. It also doubles its effect whenever you're lower HP percentage than the enemy you're hitting, so if you play your cards right, you get a massive buff. It's especially helpful against bosses because you'll have that 40% damage bonus by default for a lot of the battle. The best overall Destruction light cone though is actually only best conditionally. Clara's light cone Something Irreplaceable gives you an attack bonus, and whenever you're hit or defeat an enemy, you heal a portion of that damage back and increase your damage by 24%. That's an insane effect when it works right, with the downside being that to take full advantage of it, you need to have higher odds of taking damage. This means that you would either need to play with March 7's shield on your Destruction character, or play in Simulated Universe where your damage can be split with the right Destruction buff. With that said though, the value of this light cone when it's in the right conditions is unmatched. The ERUDITION is a sick path. All of these characters feel so alive, especially Himiko. They do have a bit of an identity crisis though, since only about half of them use follow-up attacks and the others deal shocking AoE damage. For free-to-play players, the 3-star light cones in this category actually have some pretty okay effects, but unfortunately their base stats are incredibly low. That said, Databank can be pretty good. The Seriousness of Breakfast is your free-to-play craftable light cone that gives you a tiny bit of damage bonus and increases attack based on how many enemies are defeated. Hopefully you'll get some gacha light cones though, because both this one and Make the World Clamor are pretty middle of the pack. The 4-star gacha one that you're definitely going to want is going to be Genius's Repose, which is going to give you attack percent and crit damage. It works on every single ERUDITION character. As for the best 5-star one, Jingyuan's is pretty strong. It gives skill and ult damage, as well as crit damage with 5-star base stats. Not all of the characters can take advantage of the follow-up attack mechanic that it has, but it's still a powerful light cone nonetheless, especially since it helps you build crit and the base stats are so high. I really like the Preservation class, not just because they're cool, but because March 7th Smile is preserving my mental health. I'm gonna say it right now, Texture of Memories, the 5-star free-to-play light cone from Herta's shop, has the potential to be useful if you don't run a healer in your team, and you play someone like March 7th, who wants to shield other characters, but doesn't really have the time to shield herself. But with that said, it doesn't really increase your defense by any amount, and it doesn't necessarily reduce the damage that your team takes or anything of that sort. So realistically, this light cone doesn't feel like it's that great for the preservation, especially since it has the lowest 5-star base stats for defense and is actually in line for defense with some of the 4-star light cones. I'm not gonna say you don't want to run this light cone because eventually you probably will, but I wouldn't prioritize it. For purely free-to-play players who didn't get anything from the gacha, We Are Wildfire has some good stats and damage reduction, but you also have the 3-star option of Amber, which gives you just straight up raw defense stats. The downside is that Amber actually has pretty low base stats and you probably will replace it pretty quick. As soon as you can though, you want to upgrade to Day 1 of My New Life or Trend of the Universal Market. I personally like Day 1 of My New Life because it reduces the damage taken by your entire team. Trend of the Universal Market is a damage dealing cone that has lower defensive stats, but can be helpful for dishing out some more damage in turn limited events. It's worth noting that none of the current preservation characters scale on HP yet, so cones that boost HP or don't scale defense are a lot less useful at the moment. If you do happen to have Japard's signature light cone, that one is also really good because it has high base stats, increases your defense by a lot, increases your effect hit rate by a fair bit, and gives you more taunt on the character wearing it. In case I haven't made it abundantly clear, there's a lot of great 4-star light cones in this game, but there's also some amazing 3-star light cones. In my opinion, the best non-gacha abundance light cone is actually Cornucopia, which gives you a huge raw healing bonus since it's easy to get to S5. Later on though, Quid Pro Quo can be pretty solid for the energy it gives you, which at S5 can be up to 16% energy on a random teammate every turn if you get lucky. The rest of the Abundance Light Cone's value depends on what you need, but I really like Post-Op Conversation, since it has a high HP stat and increases healing on ultimate and energy regen rate. If you do happen to get Time Waits for No One, it's an amazing cone that gives you both HP and healing bonus, and it helps output some extra damage as well. The Abundance gives you lots of options, and all of them are pretty solid. The next light cones, like Kafka, will make you bark. There are so many top tier Nihility light cones that add a ton of damage to your team. The best free-to-play one is Fermata for your damage over time dealers and debuffers. But if you manage to get lucky in the gacha, you definitely want to use Resolution Shines as Pearls of Sweat. It has its own Ensnare debuff that it can apply to enemies. The Ensnare debuff lowers enemy defense by 12% for a turn, which is a massive damage increase for your team. It's a bit harder to find defense shred than it is to stack damage percent, and because it's a debuff on an enemy rather than a buff on one character on your team, the entire team has the potential to benefit. This cone is nuts, and I'd highly recommend it if you have it. Lastly, Welt Signature in the Name of the World is a solid cone for Nihility characters who can deal solid damage, like Welt, Kafka, and Sampo. Using your skill also increases effect hit rate and attack for that move, and with its high base stats, it's an awesome light cone, and I highly recommend it. As mentioned before, I'll be looking at Battle Pass light cones in another video, but for now, that's all I got. Every character's best setup could be different, but these are the best 1.0 light cones. I hope this helps you pick something out to use while progressing your account, and if you enjoyed, subscribe for more. Also, come check out my Twitch.